Detective Archive. In 1996, a murder occurred in the United States that shook the entire country. 6-year-old JonBenet Ramsey was found dead in the basement of her parents' home. The tragedy occurred on Christmas night and left a huge number of questions that the investigation still cannot answer. One of the key roles in the whole story is played by the baby's parents, John and Patricia Ramsey, who during this time managed to be the main suspects in the crime and profit well from the death of their daughter. Some time ago, the results of a DNA test were made public, exonerating them, but the case has not yet been closed. Christmas Eve on December 25, 1996, will long remain in the memory of the residents of the town of Boulder, in the American state of Colorado. Little JonBenet Ramsey, the daughter of a wealthy computer company owner John Ramsey and his wife Patricia, went to celebrate Christmas visiting friends in the company of her parents. The celebration was fun. The children were entertained by Santa Claus all evening. JonBenet Ramsey is a beauty queen who has won many titles by the age of 6, including Little Miss Charlevoix, Little Miss Colorado, Colorado Cover Girl, and Tiny Belle of the Nation. The happy little girl fell asleep in the car on the way home, and her dad, having reached home, carried her to the nursery and put her to bed. The girl was last seen alive at 10 p.m., when her parents left her in their room for the night. What happened next is more reminiscent of a detective novel with elements of a thriller. On December 26th, JonBenet's mother woke up at 5 a.m. to get ready for a family trip to Lake Michigan. As she walked down the stairs, she saw a letter on the last step. The message said that her daughter JonBenet, who, as we remember, should have been sleeping peacefully in her bed since 10 p.m., had been kidnapped and that $118,000 was needed to get her back. Patricia immediately woke up her husband and they decided to call the police, although the letter stated that this should not be done under any circumstances. The criminals also wrote in the message that they would call between 8 o'clock and 10 o'clock to tell them how to transfer the money. The police arrived and everyone, both law enforcement officers and family members, began to wait for a call. However, no one called. Then it was decided to inspect the house. When the girl's father, accompanied by his friend, went down to the basement, he saw his daughter's lifeless body wrapped in a blanket. 2 large hematomas were found on the girl's head, and traces of blood were found on her underwear, as it later turned out not hers. Her hands were tied above her head with a white cord. The little girl was first hit on the head with a heavy object, or she could have hit the wall or the door and then strangled. Of course, the police acted incorrectly from the very beginning, which they later admitted. The house was not searched properly, and when the decision was finally made to inspect it, for some reason it was the father of the murdered baby, John, and his friend who did it, not the police. As a result, some important evidence could have been lost, and the chances of solving the crime while it was still hot were reduced to 0. They put forward 2 versions of what happened. 1. An intruder broke into the house. It was necessary to find out whether he was familiar with the girl or was a stranger. 2. The baby's parents are involved in the cubism. Having learned of the suspicions against them, the wealthy couple immediately hired the best lawyers. On their advice, John and Patricia flatly refused to give written testimony, from which the investigation hoped to obtain the opinion of specialist psychologists. There is a technique that allows one to determine quite accurately what is false and what is true in the written testimony of witnesses. The subsequent actions of the girl's mother and father also gave rise to thought. They refused to be questioned, and stated that they had already communicated all the information to investigators in informal conversations. There are many strange things in this story, and most of them are related to the behavior of the parents. For example, they said that they undressed their daughter before bed and let her hair down. But JonBenet was found in a party dress, with her hair tied into 2 ponytails, one at the back of her head and one at the top of her head, in which the leaves of the laurel wreath that the girl was wearing at the party were stuck. Does that mean they lied? No answer. During the autopsy, pieces of pineapple were found in the girl's stomach, which means that she had eaten about 4 hours before the murder. According to her parents, the last time the little girl ate was at a celebration around 8 p.m. So where did the pineapple come from in her stomach? There is no answer. By the way, the police found this fruit in the family refrigerator. Some windows and the door were not locked in the house at night. Why didn't the parents lock the house? Perhaps they opened the locks after the tragedy happened to confuse the investigation. And shortly before the incident, Patricia and John gave the keys to their home to many people, friends, relatives, servants, supposedly so that they could look after the house during the owner's future vacation. Also, a somewhat alarming fact. When Patricia wrote down the texts for handwriting analysis from dictation, she deliberately changed her handwriting. Why did she do this? No answer. The investigation initially checked the version according to which the father was the killer. It was assumed that in a fit of anger, John was on antidepressants. He accidentally hit the girl's head against something, thought that she was dead, and in fear staged her murder by a stranger. It was also assumed that he committed sexual acts against his daughter. This was also not confirmed. JonBenet's parents were cleared by a DNA test on blood found on the girl's underwear. It turned out that the blood belonged to an unknown man. As for the note from the kidnappers, it was discovered that it had been prepared in advance using a typewriter. The device was searched for everywhere they could, in John Ramsey's house, office, and garages, but it was not found. The police have been accused more than once of being fixated on the parents' guilt and not pursuing other versions. Even within the group of investigators, there were disagreements. Some were pursuing the version of the family's guilt, while others insisted on the break-in of an outsider. The latter claimed that the intruder had entered the house through a basement window that had been broken long before. A smudged boot print was also found on the window. Its origin has not yet been established. None of the family members wore such boots. JonBenet Ramsey was buried not in Boulder, but in Atlanta, Georgia, where her family once lived. Sometime after the murder, the Ramsey family decided to move back to Atlanta. The girl's mother complained that she missed her baby. In connection with this, investigators decided to conduct an operation to collect additional information. The parents were expected to visit their daughter's grave within a few days of arriving in Atlanta, and perhaps talk to each other about the murder. Their conversations could reveal new details about the case. A fake tombstone was ordered, completely replicating the real one into which listening devices were installed. The grave was placed under surveillance. However, what was the policeman's surprise when the parents didn't even think of going to their daughter's grave upon arriving in the city? They went shopping, furnished the house, took care of current affairs, and didn't even plan a visit to the cemetery. For a long time, the case was opened and closed, and there was no clarity. Journalists created a huge stir around it. Articles about the murder and new details of the investigation came out by the dozens, although many were simply false. The public did not know who to believe. The girl's parents appeared on TV shows, gave interviews, and even published a book called Death of Innocence, in which they allegedly told everything they knew about their daughter's murder, as well as put forward their own versions of what happened. Steve Thomas, the investigator who handled the case, also published a book about it. But none of these publications brought the public any closer to solving the terrible crime, and they couldn't have done so. In 2008, the unheard of happened. Former teacher John Mark Carr confessed to killing JonBenet. The man was living in Thailand at the time, and he was extradited to the United States to confirm or deny his guilt. Carr claimed that he was in love with the girl, had sex with her, and later drugged her and killed her by a ridiculous accident. After checking his testimony, it turned out that the man was lying. By the time Carr confessed, JonBenet's mother was no longer alive. She died of ovarian cancer at the age of 49. In 2008, DNA testing revealed that the blood found on JonBenet's underwear did not belong to any of the girl's relatives. The charges against the family were dropped, but there are still people who are sure that the parents were involved in the baby's murder. As it turned out, the blood belonged to an unknown man. A comparison of his DNA with the FBI's database of genetic material of criminals has not yet yielded results. We don't know if JonBenet's killer will be found. Usually such stories have a rather mysterious solution, which we hope the law enforcement officers will eventually find.